This episode is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your Raspberry Pi with our all-in-one arcade kit using genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery. Hello Cave Dwellers, today I'm fulfilling one of those ambitions that I think an awful lot of us have, and it's the kind of thing that really drives the purchasing decisions that we make in this retro hobby. Yes, it's to buy that thing that I once saw in a magazine 20 years ago and always wanted, but couldn't afford. Until now, that is. And it's the Thrustmaster Formula T2 steering wheel and pedals. I can afford it now because it was sitting unloved on eBay, and at first glance you might think this thing looks to be in good shape. But we've got a surprising amount of work to do on it to make it as good as new. So it's on with the murder gloves, and let's see what we're dealing with. Cosmetically, the closer you look at this thing, the more filth you see. That steering wheel in particular has some lovely mouldy patches taking hold on the rubber. But, you know, on the whole, the plastics themselves look to be unbroken or scratched, so that's not a bad start. The foot pedals, they tell a bit of a different tale, as you can see. The metal base plate has got rust setting in, but the tension is good on the main springs. They feel like they're still up to the job. The smaller springs you may notice at the top of the pedals, they're starting to corrode, as are many nuts and bolts as you look closer at this thing, and who knows what horrors wait inside for us. The setup also includes a sequential shifter, and by that I mean you can slap it up or down, it's only those directions. And there's no force feedback on the wheel, but it does spring back into place and offers a degree of resistance the more you turn it, so it'll be interesting to see what the mechanism is inside there. Now, funnily enough, I still have the leaflet that I fawned over as a teenager in 1996, and it's full of all those great Thrustmaster joysticks that we know and love, but also our steering wheels in here. And it says, with the Formula T2, all you're missing is the smell of racing fuel, for a cool price of $179. And another example that I found here, it lists it at $149, and it really does look the part, doesn't it? At the height of my playing of Formula 1 Grand Prix or IndyCar racing, it really did look like a must-own bit of kit. And it looks like there was also a budget version. I've got another leaflet here for something called the Grand Prix, which substitutes the gear shift for 2 buttons on the wheel, and the foot pedals are gone for levers behind the wheel for that analog acceleration and braking. But again, I never actually owned that, I just happened to find the leaflet in a box. Right, so I guess we'd better tear this down if I'm to live out my teenage dreams, starting with the wheel. So let's get inside, shall we? And as we open up the casing, what we get for our $179 is surprisingly little at first glance. I mean, I wasn't expecting to find a huge amount in here, but some of the materials are not premium, shall we say. A potentiometer sits at the back of the steering wheel shaft to register the turns, and as we can twist it, we can see just what is providing the resistance and the centering of the steering wheel. It's this bungee cord. Yep. It's a bungee cord, and those rubber stoppers at the top provide hard stops should you twist the wheel that far. But yeah, bungee cords are kind of novel and certainly very cheap. But if you thought that was cheap, wait until you see inside the gear stick. I thought this was a screwball top like an arcade joystick, but it just pops right off. And as we get inside, we can see that the mechanism here for centering the gear stick is a black rubber band. And a pretty loose one at that. This stick is really quite sloppy. We've then got 2 micro switches which sit inside there, and the stick just bashes against them to register a press. So I think what we'll do now is we'll remove them and the rest of the wiring loom, get it all out of the way, and then that will allow us to clean things up without worrying about that. And we'll also take out the rusty screws which surround the steering wheel and snip out the bungee cord, because I'm sure that's lost a lot of tension over the years, and I want to make it look and operate as new, so we need to replace that really. First up, it's the easy part, and that's scrubbing everything in some warm soapy water, especially that steering wheel, while being careful not to damage any stickers. Then it's time for the ultrasonic cleaner to sort out those screws, which are visible on the outside of the case, so they need to look pristine if this is to look like new. Into the cleaner goes 1 part rust remover and 5 parts water, roughly measured out. And then I ran a 5-minute cycle through twice just to make sure it did the job. When they came out, not only was the rust gone, but so was the paint. So I keyed them up and gave them several rounds of Rust-Oleum black paint. And that's not me piling the paint on all at once, by the way, it's several light coats with drying time in between. I'm just editing all of that out here for you. I'm sure you don't want to watch paint dry. For the plastics, I treated them with some black plastic restorer of the type you might restore your faded plastic trim with on your car, and then some vinyl shampoo. And that gave it a nice sheen and that lovely new car smell for some extra authenticity. And hopefully you'll agree that's coming up quite nicely. While the steering wheel shaft is plastic, the hole has a metal ring in it and it's rusty, so let's take care of that. I'm wondering if this has been left in a shed or a garage to have started to corrode in the places it has. And I'm going to tackle this with the undiluted rust remover that we used in the ultrasonic cleaner, being very careful not to get it on the plastics. And after a couple of minutes, that's come up looking like new. So what's next? The potentiometer, unless we find it isn't working, just gets a squirt of contact cleaner to clean it up, just a squirt through the window at the top of the pop. You don't need to saturate it in the stuff. And then a few twists just to work that contact cleaner through. Now these cleaning products will say that they're strictly not to be used on steering wheels. What are you going to do, arrest me? It's not that they won't work, of course, it's so that your hands don't slip off the wheel and you end up hurting someone, but I think mould is more dangerous on our virtual car, so I'm going to give that a clean. And the rubber really does clean up well and it feels quite nice and nourished by the end of it. Now, to put it all back together, and in doing so I'll replace that old bungee cord with a new one. I mean, they aren't exactly expensive, so it'll be nice to feel this with the tension it would have had when it was new out the box. I ended up taping the ends of the bungee cord to stop them from fraying, which seems to be fine, but you might want to hot glue the ends instead. It's entirely up to you. What holds them in place are these stoppers, which they wrap around, and then the cable ties, which you have to get on there nice and tight just to keep it really securely in place, even when you're at maximum turning point of the steering wheel so it doesn't ping through. It's springing back with a lot more force than it did before. And while we're fixing up elastic bands, I went ahead and replaced that gear stick band with a band that I've doubled up on for extra tension. I really want that stick to spring back into place when I'm using it with some force. And the double band really does the job. That feels good, and I think Cole Trickle himself would approve of that gear stick. So with that, I think we can wire the wheel back up, and then we can turn our attention to the foot pedals. So yeah, these don't seem too bad from the outside, but as soon as we get that lid off, you can see it's pretty filthy. Our base plate is rusting and those pedals should be nice and shiny. There are 2 more potentiometers that sit in here for those 2 pedals, but it's kind of odd because the cover has a slot for a 3rd pedal, a clutch pedal, but we don't have one. Nor do we have the bracket on the base plate to move a pedal over there, or to add one, which is kind of a shame. I would have liked to have had that 3rd pedal. Anyway, it is what it is, so let's clear it up and strip it down for a deep clean. The pots get some contact cleaner, just as they did inside the steering wheel, and then the pedals come out. And if you're doing this yourself, I really do recommend you taking pictures or filming it so that you can figure out how the mechanism in each pedal goes back together. It will save you a lot of time, I promise. What then do we do with our foot sweat-induced rust? For the long-time preservation of this, I decided to go to the effort of sanding it down, and then I treated it with some Rust-Oleum paint. This doesn't require a perfect paint job because the majority of it is concealed under that plastic cover. It's really for my own peace of mind. So I sanded off all of the rust and that came off really easily, and then I keyed up the rest of the plate, and then I hung it and gave it 3 light coats of black Rust-Oleum paint. And I think that came out pretty good. Yes, the light will catch overspray, but when the cover's on, very little of it is on show, and it looks so much better. I think we're on the home stretch now, so it was back to the ultrasonic cleaner to clean up the rusty springs and the pedal plates, and all of the plastic was cleaned and treated in just the same way as we did before. And then I finished off the metal parts with a little bit of metal polish. And then I can start to put it all back together. And I think you'll agree that if we remind ourselves how this started out, yeah, it's disgusting. It looks a lot nicer now. The more observant actually will see that I scratched the back of the base plate there. That was when I used a screwdriver to prime the large spring back into the pedal, and it slipped and I scratched the base plate. So when I spotted that, I did give it another quick spray. So that's gone now. And that's it, it's all back together. And I'm ready to live out my teenage dream. So let's see how it drives and see if it's as good as I imagined it was all those years ago. And so there was just one small obstacle in testing, and that's my desk. It's so thick, the standard clamp screws are too short, but that's easily fixed with some longer M6 sized bolts. And then once set up, it's really inviting. Just look at it. I love the look of this wheel. All of the potentiometers checked out, they're nice and smooth, there's no jittering when calibrating the wheel, which I did in NASCAR Racing 2, but I quickly switched back to NASCAR 1 with the graphics turned down, just so I could get a better frame rate and enjoy the game more. What surprised me most was how oddly effective the bungee cord was. It's not a patch on modern force feedback, of course, but the way it pulls tighter the more you turn the wheel is oddly convincing. It really does fool your brain. And this wheel, despite all of that plastic, really does feel like a solid product. I'm not scared that it's going to snap if I get heavy-handed with it. It really does feel like an old sim racer's wheel rather than a toy. And that, I think, is everything that I could have hoped for from it. So it definitely gets a thumbs up from me, and Teenage Neil would have been extremely happy with this indeed. Some may think it's completely insane to spend this much time repairing this, but I think it's time well spent. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch today. So I hope you've enjoyed this restoration, and take care. If you've enjoyed today's video and what I do here in general, then consider heading over to patreon.com/retromancave, where a small contribution will give you access to all videos 1 week early without any adverts, but most importantly, you'll become an official cave dweller. I hope to see you there, and thank you.